Imagine an emperor, the pinnacle of authority in his realm, vanishing without a trace, no farewell, no battle, no scandal, no official account to explain his disappearance. Historians stumble over fragments, psychologists over patterns of human behavior, and philosophers over the paradox itself. How can a figure so central to a civilization simply cease to exist in our collective memory without leaving a discernible mark? This is not merely a story about one man, but a lens into the mechanisms of human society, the architecture of perception, and the adaptive strategies of both individual minds and civilizations under stress. In the shadows of his absence, we discover the profound interplay between power, cognition, and the resilience of complex systems. The emperor who disappeared is less a historical anomaly than a signal, a prism refracting the deeper currents of collective consciousness and the subtle logic of historical continuity. The disappearance of a ruler is, on the surface, a logistical and political puzzle. Leaders, especially those who wield absolute or near-absolute authority, are embedded in vast networks of administration, military command, and ritual legitimacy. Each action they take, each decision, reverberates across these networks, producing cascading effects. From a systems neuroscience perspective, one might liken the emperor's presence to a critical node in a neural network. Its sudden absence would, theoretically, precipitate instability, confusion, and systemic stress. Yet history teaches us otherwise. Civilizations often adapt to such absences with astonishing speed, revealing not chaos, but the robustness of societal systems under duress. The emperor's disappearance is less a rupture than a controlled experiment in collective adaptation. How does a society recalibrate its energy and attention when the focal point of authority dissolves into uncertainty? To understand this phenomenon, we must first consider the psychological architecture of leadership and its symbolic function. An emperor is not only a decision-maker, but a living signifier, an organizing principle for perception and expectation. His presence modulates behavior, shapes narratives, and stabilizes perceptions of order. When such a figure disappears, what is affected is not merely the operational capacity of governance, but the cognitive map of the populace. Anthropologists and psychologists call this the anchoring effect in collective cognition. Humans, like neurons, seek reference points. A ruler, particularly one mythologized through ceremony, architecture, and ritual, becomes such a reference point. When the anchor vanishes, the collective mind must adjust, often by creating compensatory narratives or redistributing attention to other nodes within the societal network. History presents several enigmatic instances of this phenomenon. Consider the emperor of a vast Eastern dynasty whose reign spanned decades of prosperity and cultural flourishing, yet whose sudden absence in the historical record puzzled contemporaries and confounded successors. Some hypothesize assassination, some voluntary abdication, and others natural death deliberately obscured. Modern historiography often emphasizes documentary silence as a clue rather than a void. Silence itself is a signal. It informs us that the mechanisms of record-keeping, propaganda, and memory management were actively negotiating the emperor's disappearance. This negotiation is not just political but deeply cognitive. The collective mind must reconcile the tension between expectation and reality, between the presence it relies upon and the absence it suddenly confronts. From a philosophical standpoint, the emperor's vanishing challenges our notions of causality and significance. If power is the engine of history, what happens when the engine is removed without notice? The answer lies in understanding the emergent properties of social systems. Just as neural networks exhibit redundancy, where the loss of a single neuron rarely collapses function, civilizations exhibit structural redundancy, institutional plasticity, and behavioral resilience. While a singular ruler may appear indispensable, the underlying patterns of social interaction, law, economic exchange, and cultural continuity often possess a capacity for self-regulation far greater than we intuitively assume. The disappearance, paradoxically, illuminates the strength of the system. A civilization's survival may depend less on individual actors and more on the network of relationships, norms, and adaptive heuristics they inhabit. Consider the lens of neuropsychology. Human perception is inherently pattern-seeking. Our brains are wired to detect anomalies, assign meaning, and construct narratives. In a society, collective perception operates similarly. When an emperor disappears, the population's interpretive mechanisms are triggered. Rumors spread, myths form, and historical memory begins to fill gaps with speculative threads. These processes resemble predictive coding in the brain. The mind generates hypotheses to minimize uncertainty and stabilize perception. Thus, the emperor's absence becomes a catalyst for imaginative reconstruction, revealing the ways in which human consciousness and historical narrative co-evolve. Each rumor, each reinterpretation, functions as a neuron firing, contributing to the emergent pattern that defines the collective memory of the event. Moreover, the emperor's vanishing provides a fascinating window into the concept of stress adaptation at both individual and societal levels. Psychologists describe stress not merely as a reaction to threat, but as a system-wide recalibration in response to uncertainty. Societies, much like individual organisms, deploy adaptive strategies when a central stabilizing figure is removed. Bureaucracies may temporarily fragment but then reorganize. Military hierarchies may experience initial confusion but soon redistribute authority. Cultural and religious rituals may shift their focus to alternative figures or symbolic mechanisms. The system is remarkably resilient because it operates not through the static authority of a single node, but through the dynamic interplay of multiple interconnected nodes. The emperor's disappearance, therefore, is not a failure, but a test of systemic intelligence. Let us also examine the metaphor of energy networks. A civilization can be conceptualized as a vast energy field where ideas, resources, influence, and information flow like currents through a complex lattice. The emperor functions as a focal point, a node that coordinates, directs, and sometimes constrains the flow. When this node disappears, the energy field must redistribute. Currents reroute, bottlenecks form, feedback loops adjust, and new nodes emerge. Observing the aftermath of such a disappearance is akin to studying the dynamics of a dissipating neural signal. The system seeks equilibrium, and the emergent behavior may reveal hidden structures that were always present but previously invisible. These dynamics illuminate fundamental principles about resilience, adaptation, and the hidden architecture of social cognition. One of the most intriguing aspects of these events is the emergence of historical myth-making. The emperor who disappears often acquires an almost legendary status precisely because of the absence. In the vacuum left behind, collective imagination flourishes. Stories proliferate, each a projection of societal anxieties, desires, and explanatory needs. Psychologists identify this as a form of transference. The qualities projected onto the absent figure reveal the underlying psychological and cultural dynamics of the society itself. In essence, the emperor becomes a mirror, reflecting not himself but the system he inhabited. By studying the legends, distortions, and narratives surrounding his disappearance, we gain insight not merely into an individual's fate, but into the cognitive and cultural ecosystem that sustained him. Yet, there is a more subtle twist in this tale. While we often perceive disappearance as weakness or failure, it can, under certain conditions, function as a stabilizing mechanism. History shows examples where a ruler's absence, or the mystery surrounding it, enabled societies to bypass potentially catastrophic conflicts. The removal of a dominant but polarizing figure can reduce factional tension, allow previously suppressed institutions to assert themselves, and permit cultural innovation without direct confrontation. In these cases, what appears as an individual lapse or loss becomes a catalyst for systemic resilience. The very void created by the absence of leadership serves as a protective feature, not a vulnerability, highlighting the non-linear, often counterintuitive logic of historical processes. From the perspective of perception and cognition, this paradox resonates with deeper philosophical themes. Humans tend to overestimate the importance of visible agents and underestimate the distributed intelligence of networks. We are conditioned to assign causality to individuals, yet history frequently demonstrates that outcomes are emergent, arising from interactions between countless actors, norms, and material conditions. The emperor's disappearance forces us to confront the illusion of centrality and reconsider the mechanics of historical agency. Power, in this light, is less about presence and more about the structural capacity of the system to maintain coherence amidst perturbation. The absence of the emperor becomes a profound lesson in distributed cognition and emergent order. Moreover, this event invites reflection on the nature of knowledge and historical truth. Documentation, artifacts, and chronicles are never neutral. They are constructed through selective perception, cultural priorities, and cognitive biases. The absence of explicit records regarding an emperor's fate is itself informative. It signals not ignorance, but deliberate epistemic negotiation. Decisions were made about what to preserve, what to obscure, and how collective attention should be directed. Historians, in decoding these absences, engage in a form of reverse engineering of perception itself, reconstructing not only events but the mental models of those who lived through them. The disappearance, paradoxically, enhances our understanding of the society's epistemic architecture, revealing both its strengths and its blind spots. In psychological terms, the emperor's vanishing engages mechanisms of anxiety, anticipation, and cognitive closure. Humans are uncomfortable with ambiguity. Uncertainty triggers neural circuits designed to seek patterns and predict outcomes. When a central figure disappears, societies experience collective cognitive stress. Yet, this stress is productive. It catalyzes problem-solving, adaptive governance, and creative narrative construction. The brain, and by extension the collective mind, converts absence into informational energy, redirecting focus and generating resilience. The emperor's disappearance, therefore, is not a void but a stimulus, illuminating how uncertainty drives evolution, both biological and cultural. This scenario also highlights the limits of perception and attention. Just as neurons can be overloaded and fail to transmit signals efficiently, human societies have thresholds beyond which complexity cannot be fully apprehended. The sudden removal of a leader exposes these limits, but also triggers compensatory mechanisms: delegation, decentralization, and emergent leadership. Historical records reveal that in many such cases, the most remarkable outcomes were not centralized reforms, but spontaneous adjustments by individuals, communities, and institutions operating in parallel. The emperor's disappearance thus teaches a profound lesson about the distributed nature of cognition, the nonlinearity of causality, and the adaptive wisdom embedded in collective structures. At a philosophical level, the event forces us to contemplate the relationship between presence and meaning. Does an emperor derive significance from his actions or from the perceptions and responses he elicits? If the latter, then disappearance does not annihilate influence. It transforms it. The emperor's absence reshapes cultural narratives, reallocates attention, and generates emergent patterns of meaning that might never have arisen under the constraints of continuous presence. In this sense, the disappearance is a catalyst for philosophical reflection. The invisible hand of absence orchestrates outcomes as profoundly as the visible hand of authority. Ultimately, the story of the emperor who vanished without a trace is not about loss, but about the resilience and adaptability of human systems. It illuminates how civilizations navigate uncertainty, how cognitive networks respond to the removal of critical nodes, and how perception and memory construct narratives in the face of ambiguity. The event serves as a bridge between history, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, demonstrating that the disappearance of a single individual can reveal the hidden architectures of social life, the emergent intelligence of collectives, and the enduring paradoxes of power and perception. It is a reminder that history is not merely a chronicle of actions, but a dynamic interplay between presence, absence, cognition, and adaptation. As we reflect on this paradox, we confront questions that extend beyond the past into the present and future. How do contemporary societies respond to sudden leadership vacuums? What can we learn from historical cases about the distribution of authority, the resilience of networks, and the cognitive strategies humans employ under uncertainty? How does the interplay between perception, expectation, and reality shape collective outcomes? By studying the disappearance of an emperor, we are not merely satisfying curiosity about a historical anomaly. We are engaging with fundamental principles of human behavior, cognition, and social organization. Each vanished ruler, each silent record, each gap in the chronicle is an invitation to explore the limits and capacities of collective intelligence. In conclusion, the emperor who disappeared without a trace is both a historical enigma and a philosophical lesson. His absence illuminates the hidden architecture of human systems, the adaptive strategies that sustain civilizations, and the cognitive processes that allow societies to thrive amidst uncertainty. It challenges our assumptions about centrality, power, and causality, revealing that the robustness of human systems often lies not in individuals, but in networks, norms, and emergent patterns. It teaches us that absence is not merely a void, but a force that shapes perception, drives adaptation, and fosters resilience. The story invites us to reconsider what it means to influence, to lead, and to exist within a system larger than ourselves. As we ponder this enigmatic disappearance, we are left with a deeper understanding of history, mind, and society, and a reminder that the unseen mechanisms of adaptation are as crucial as the visible events that dominate chronicles and memory. So I leave you with this question. In your own life and society, what absences, subtle signals, or unseen forces might be shaping outcomes more than the most visible actors? Reflect on it, discuss it, and let the inquiry continue. If you found this exploration illuminating, consider subscribing to Past Lens, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and joining us in uncovering the hidden patterns of history and human behavior.